Hello, BookTube. This is a May for Magazines event. We're going through the Century magazine, and today is very rainy here in Dalazanovich, and you probably could tell by my hair so wet and everything. I've been out in the rain, and I thought I'd start with The Sheriff's Work on a Ranch by Theodore Roosevelt, illustrations by Frederick Remington. The only problem with these stories is the fact that there's no breakage in them. So let's see how far I can go before I come to the stop. Okay, here we go. Up to 1880, the country through which the Little Missouri flows remained as wild and almost unknown as it was when the old explorers and fur traders crossed it in the early part of the century. It was the last great Indian hunting ground, across with which the Gros Venturas and the Mandans, Sioux, and Cheyennes, and even the Crows and Rays wandered and chased the game, and where they fought one another and plundered the small parties of white trappers and hunters that occasionally ventured into it. Once or twice, generals like Sully and Custer had penetrated it in the course of the long, tedious, and bloody campaigns that finally broke the strength of the northern horse Indians. Indeed, the trail made up by Custer's baggage train is to this day one of the well-known landmarks, for the deep ruts worn by the wheels of the heavy wagons are in place still as distinctively to be seen as ever. In 1883, a regular long-range skirmish took place just south of us between some Cheyennes and some cowboys, with bloodshed on both sides, while about the same time a band of Sioux planted a party of buffalo hunters of everything they owned, and some Crows who attempted the same feat with another party were driven off with the loss of two of their number. Since then, there have been in our neighborhood no stand-up fights or regular raids, but the Indians have different times proved more or less troublesome, burning the grass and occasionally killed stock or carried off horses that have wandered some distance away. They have also themselves suffered somewhat at the hands of the white horse thieves. Bands of them, accompanied by their squaws and children, often come into the ranch country, either to trade or to hunt, and are then, of course, perfectly meek and peaceable. If they stay any time, they built themselves quite comfortable teepees, wigwams as they would be styled in the East. And an Indian camp is rather interesting, though very dirty, place to visit. On our ranch, we get along particularly well with them, as it is a rule that they should be treated as fairly as they were whites. We neither wrong them ourselves nor allow others to wrong them. We have, as always, for example, been as keen in putting down horse stealing from Indians as from the whites, which indicates rather an advanced stage of frontier morality, as theft from the redskins or the government is usually held to be a very trivial matter compared with the heinous crime of theft from citizens. There's always a danger of meeting a band of young bucks in a lonely, inhabited country, those that barely reach manhood, being the most truculent, insolent, and reckless. A man in meeting such a party runs great risk of losing his horse, his rifle, and all else he has. This has happened quite frequently during the past few years to hunters or cowboys that have wandered into debatable territory where our country borders on Indian lands. In at least one such instance that took place 2 years ago, the unfortunate individual lost his life as well as his belongings. But the frontiersman of any experience can generally stand off a small number of such assailants, unless he's lost his nerve or is taken by surprise. My only venture with Indians was a very mild kind. It was in the course of a solitary trip to the north and east of our range, to what was then practically unknown country, although now containing many herds of cattle. One morning I had been traveling along the edge of the prairie, and about noon I rode Manitow up a slight rise and came on a plateau that perhaps a half mile broad. When near the middle, 4 or 5 Indians suddenly came up over the ridge directly in front of me. The second they saw me, they whipped their guns out of their slings, started their horses to run, and came on at a full tilt, whooping and brandishing their weapons. I instantly reared up and reined up and dismounted. The level plain where we were was of all places the one of which such an onslaught could best be met. In any broken country, or where there was much cover, a white man is at a great disadvantage if pitted against such adepts in the art of hiding as Indians, while on the other hand, the latter will rarely rush in on a foe who, even if overpowered in the end, will probably inflict severe loss on his assailants. The fury of an Indian charge and the whoops by which it was accompanied often scare horses so as to stampede them, but in Manitou I had perfect trust, and the old fellow stood as steady as a rock, merely cocking his ears and looking around at the noise. I waited until the Indians were 100 yards off, and threw up my rifle, drew a bead on the foremost. The effect was like magic. The whole party scattered out as wild pigeons or teal ducks sometimes do when shot at, and doubled back on their tracks, the man bending over alongside their horses. When some distance off, they halted and gathered together to consult, and after a minute, one came forward alone, ostentatiously dropping his rifle and waving a blanket over his head. When he came to within 50 yards, I stopped him, and he pulled out a piece of paper. All Indians, when absent from their reservations, are supposed to carry passes, and called out, "How, me good Indian?" I answered, "How," and assured him most sincerely I was very glad he was a good Indian, but I would not let him draw closer. And when his companions began to draw near, I covered him with the rifle and made him move off, which he did with a sudden lapse in the most canonical Anglo-Saxon profanity. I then started to lead my horse out of the prairie. After hovering around a short time, they rode off while I followed suit, but in the opposite direction. It had all passed too quickly for me to have time to get frightened, but during the rest of my ride I was exceedingly uneasy, and pushed tough, speedy old Manitou along at a rapid rate, keeping well on the level. However, I never saw the Indians again. This may not have intended any mischief beyond giving me a fright, but I did not dare to let them come to close quarters, for they would probably taken my horse and rifle, and not impossibly my scalp as well. Towards nightfall, I fell in with old trappers who lived near Kildare Mountains, and they informed me that my assailants were some young Sioux bucks, at whose hand they themselves had just suffered the loss of a couple of horses. However, in our immediate locality, we have much more difficulty with white desperadoes than the redskins. At times there has been a great deal of cattle killing and horse stealing, and occasionally a murder or two. But as regards the last, the man has very little more to fear in the West than the East, in spite of all the lawless acts one reads about. Undoubtedly, a long-standing quarrel sometimes ends in a shooting match, and of course savage affrays occasionally take place in the bar rooms, in which, be be it remarked that it is so much as the men are generously drunk, and furthermore, as a revolver is best as a rather inaccurate weapon, outsiders are nearly as apt to get hurt as are the participants. But if a man minds his own business and does not go into barrooms, gambling saloons, and the like, he need not have fear of being molested, while a revolver is a more foolish encumbrance for any but a trained expert, and need never be carried. Against horse thieves, cattle thieves, claim jumpers, and the like, however, every ranchman has to be on his guard, and armed collisions with these gentry is sometimes inevitable. The fact of such scandals being able to ply their trade with impunity for any length of time can only be understood if the absolute wildness of our land is taken into account. The country is yet unsurveyed and unmapped. The course of the river itself, as put down on various government and railroad maps, is very much a mere piece of guesswork, its bed being in many parts, as by my ranch, 10 to 15 miles or more away from where these maps make it. White hunters came into the land by 1880, but the actual settlement only began in 1882, when the first cattlemen drove in their herds, all northern stock. The Texans not passed north of the country along the headwaters of the river till the following year, while until 1885 the territory through which it ran for a few final 150 miles before entering the big Missouri remained as little known as ever. Some of us had always been anxious to run down the river in the boat during the time of the spring floods, as we thought we might get good duck and goose shooting, and also kill some beaver, while the trip would in addition have all the charm of an exploring expedition. Twice, so far as we knew, the feast had been performed both times by hunters, and at one instance of very good luck in shooting and trapping. A third attempt by a couple of men on the raft made the spring proceeding that on which we made ours had been less successful, for when a score or so of miles below our ranch, a bear killed one of the two adventurers, and the survivor returned. We could only go down during a freshet, for the little Missouri, like most plains rivers, usually either a dwindling streamlet, a more slender thread of sluggish water, or else a boiling muddy torrent running over a bed, a shifty quicksand that neither man nor beast can cross. It rises and falls with extraordinary suddenness and intensity, an instance of which have just occurred as this very page is being written. Last evening, when the moon rose from the ranch veranda, we could see the riverbed almost dry. The stream having shrunk under the drought, still it was little but a string of shallow pools, with beneath them a trickle of water that was not ankle deep, and hardly wet the fetlocks of the shadow band when driven across it. Yet at daybreak this morning, without any rain having fallen near us, but doubtless in consequence of some heavy cloudburst near its head, the swift and swollen current was forming brim high between the banks, and even the fords were swimming deep for the horses. Accordingly, we planned to run down the river sometime towards the end of April, taking advantage of the rise, but an accident made us start 3 to 4 weeks sooner than we had intended. And I will stop there. And so this goes on for about 10-12 pages. There's a picture by Frederick Remington. It's called Standing Off the Indians. And that's it for Theodore Roosevelt's story called Sheriff Works Off a Ranch. And thank you very much, BookTube, for listening.